right, so we are now at 1 p.m. And I want to welcome everyone to our second Away Home Youth Homelessness Community Planning webinar of the monthly series. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. If not, feel free to send me a direct message. My name is Oksana Rodenko, and I'm the Communications Coordinator at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, helping out with the tech side of things today. So if you can find my name on the list of attendees, I'm just the host up at the top. If you do have any questions during today's session, please type them into the chat box and we'll address them during the question and answer period at the end. We're also recording today's session and we'll be sharing that with everyone who registered, and we'll be putting it up on the Away Home website and on the new Away Home YouTube channel. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. I'll pass it on to Melanie Redman, the Executive Director of Away Home.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. You know, I'm always amazed at our team with the Canadian Observatory and Away Home, because I didn't even realize we had a YouTube channel. Nice job, guys. So yes, again, I'm the ED of Away Home Canada, and I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Gaetz from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Homeless Hub. Many of you will be familiar with Dr. Gaetz. Want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, so this is part of a series, a year-long curriculum, webinar curriculum, funded by the Province of Ontario, thank you very much, Province, in collaboration with OMSSA to help support certain service managers around Ontario and, frankly, anyone else around the world interested in this topic in moving forward with systems planning specific to preventing and ending youth homelessness. And so our first webinar of the year was focused on the youth homelessness community planning and the toolkit that we developed and released last year as a result of all of our learnings in the U.S. and Canada, youth homelessness community planning, and on planning best community practices writ large. And so this one focuses on collective impact. And we're going to tell you why we think collective impact is important on youth homelessness and really go through what we've learned in not only being a collective impact initiative as a national entity, but also supporting local collective impact initiatives. And, you know, for many of you, these are words you've heard before, collective impact, blah, 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 collective impact. But it's more than just, they're more than just words. It's actually incredibly important. And so I'm going to dig down and we're going to explore some of these topics with you today. So the context. So what is Away Home? For those of you who know, you know, this is just a review, but we're a national coalition of all of the national organizations that work on housing and homelessness. We've come together to strategically align, including in many occasions, the resources in hand for maximum impact on the issue of youth homelessness. Go ahead. And so what's in a name? So this name is fantastic. We were supporting a number of communities through a national pilot called Mobilizing Local Capacity to End Youth Homelessness. And one of those communities we were supporting to do a systems plan was Kamloops, British Columbia. And there was a wonderful youth engagement process as part of that planning initiative. And the young people with lived experience decided that the work should be called Away Home, because they said there's more than one way home, and home means different things to different people. And so we found that just beautiful and compelling. And so we asked Kamloops and the youth group if we could adopt that name. And since then, we've been incredibly pleased because communities, not just in Canada, but actually around the world, have been adopting the name Away Home. And what they're saying is they're signing on to two things. They're signing on to a commitment. And the commitment that they're signing on to is around investing in prevention and utilizing collective impact to work across the systems that drive young people into homelessness. And so we think that's very powerful. And I'll come back to that in a second. Now, as a coalition, we organize ourselves around these key constellations of activities. And what's powerful about it is it's a dispersed leadership model. And so I'll give you an example. The research constellation Instead of, building out our organization Away Home to have a research department and, having to constantly bring in resources to support that, we collaborate with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, who take the lead on co-creating a national youth homelessness research agenda with young people with lived experience, practitioners, and other researchers and policymakers, and then we collectively deliver on that. So that's kind of the power of our model. And again, a lot of our work goes back to our earlier efforts before we went out and formed Away Home as its own organization in supporting communities to do systems planning. And so, again, I mentioned earlier that folks have been signing on and becoming Away Home communities. It's not rocket science. It's if you want to be a Away Home community, you just reach out to me and say, you know what, we think we're ready. We are committed. We've got the service manager at the table. We've got young people with lived experience. We've got service providers, and we've got unusual suspects at the community. And we want to move forward with a comprehensive strategy so we can finally prevent and end youth homelessness. And, if that's the case, then we would love to have you sign on to this movement for change.
So we're going to switch now to talk about the Ontario context. And in doing this, we want to really stress that we're very aware and supportive of great work that's happening all across the country from coast to coast to coast. The focus on Ontario is because there's a concerted effort to do some work across the province on youth homelessness. A year and a half ago, the province released a report of their expert advisory panel on homelessness, and it identified 4 priority areas that all intersect. One being addressing chronic homelessness, another being Indigenous homelessness, another being young or people leaving systems, whether it's justice system, healthcare, or child protection, and homelessness, and then finally youth homelessness. This is an important signal that the province takes very seriously this issue, and so the work to be done is to support communities that want to move from just a general homelessness strategy to one that focuses more on youth. And we've seen that there's a lot of interest, growing interest. What we're going to show you here isn't even a complete list, but these are the communities that we know for sure that are in the process of or are very interested in developing a youth homelessness strategy. Kingston is already in the implementation stage. As you can see, they're all across the province in southern Ontario, and there are more to come. This creates real opportunities in the province because the communities can come up together to work on youth homelessness. There's opportunities for shared learning, a community practice, to think about how do we implement different things and how do we engage the provincial government to also support the efforts that have to happen at the community level. So now we're moving to just understanding collective impact. And as Melanie said before, it's language that people use a lot now, but we have to be careful not to just let it become jargon. It actually means something very much in particular about how we work together. It's challenging work, but when it happens, it's incredible. So we want to go through what collective impact is, and in addition, talk about how it makes sense around youth homelessness and what are the opportunities and challenges. And we start by saying, why do we need collective impact? What we're trying to do here is address what is often called a wicked problem. From a policy perspective, wicked problems are complex problems in society that involve many different players and sectors in the solutions. They're not easily done. They can't be solved by a single organization. They cannot even be solved by a sector. And I'll give you a good example that is often used is climate change, right? This is a complex problem, and for us to make progress on it, it's going to require individuals, organizations, government policy, different systems, changing the way all of us live and operate our lives, right? So that's a wicked problem. Homelessness is like that in many ways too. It's a wicked problem in that the drivers of homelessness come from many different, broad structural issues, including poverty and lack of affordable housing, discrimination. individual problems and challenges that people face, and then structural problems in terms of the systems we put in place undermining people's housing. And so to really address homelessness, one of the challenges in the past is that the homelessness sector alone has been kind of charged with solving the problem, and we don't think that's the way to go. And collective impact offers a way of thinking about how do we work collaboratively to tackle such wicked problems. And so, yes, and youth homelessness is one in particular. Again, we can't solve youth homelessness by just taking the adult models and changing the age mandate. We have to have very targeted approaches that work across sectors and systems. So, you know, people often say, oh, well, we collaborate, we work together. Well, and yeah, certainly people do, right? But there's much more to collective impact than just simply collaboration. That's going to be a key theme as we go through. People often, you know, in many communities in Canada, the homelessness sector and the youth homelessness sector is very fragmented. There is deep collaboration or integration. There's very often an absence of flow through, so young people can be tracked as they move through the system and exit it. This causes all kinds of problems, and sometimes we blame it on funders, right? The funders make us compete, and certainly that's a factor, but there's other factors at play in terms of the culture of organizations, whether we're talking about silos within government or different agencies in the community. I like to call it the specialness disease, where people often, what gets in the way of collaborating is people feeling that they're doing the important work and other people aren't, or their organization is more important, or focusing only of their organization. We're all part of that system. This isn't a criticism of anyone in particular. We're all part of it, but to do collective impact, we have to really move beyond that situation.
So what is it? I think that the definition is actually quite revealing at how it differs from just collaboration, which, as Steve was mentioning, of course, is very important. But collective impact involves a group of relevant actors, so people who can affect change, so decision makers, et cetera, from different sectors working together to address a major challenge by developing and working toward a common goal. And then here's the key for me, that fundamentally changes outcomes for a population, okay? So that's really important. So we're talking about, you know, if I partner and collaborate with a number of organizations, we may do some fantastic work, and that's great, you know, but we're talking about, we want to see a change at the population level. So we want to see the numbers of young people experiencing homelessness driven down dramatically by our efforts.
And the changes to get there involves both helping young people exit homelessness in a very safe and planned way, and on the other hand, stopping the flow into homelessness.
So preconditions for collective impact. And again, you know, we derive all of our thinking and all of our efforts on collective impact from a number of sources. And this is, you know, so you may have seen some of these visuals or slides before from different entities. Tamarack does wonderful work. Inouï's, tons written in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So we think it's really important to name that you need influential leaders, and you need a sense of urgency. And I can't think of anything more urgent than the thought of young people being mired in homelessness for any amount of time. You have to build trust. So there has to be trust in a community, and you know, all of your efforts have to continue building that trust, and also adequate resources so that you can, you know, not only resource the coming together of the people, but resource the kinds of changes that you need to see. And people often say, well, there aren't adequate resources. Well, you know, we've been supporting communities around the country that have gotten really creative in figuring out how to resource these efforts. And collaboration, again, not the same as collective impact. If it sounds like we're beating a drum on that, it's because we are. And so the essential shift, and I find this slide, this visual very helpful. Organizations, and you know, many of us on this call either currently run organizations or have run organizations. And you know, you've got a mission, you got a vision, you got values, and you got a strategic plan that you're accountable to. And that's, you know, your organization. And so collective impact requires that when you're doing the work on youth homelessness planning and implementation, that you got to take that specialized agenda hat off and you got to put on the common agenda hat. And that's a hard thing for folks, for me to do, and I live and breathe this stuff, right? And we have to move from fragmented measurements to shared measurement. How do we know that something is changing? And Steve's going to dive into shared measurement in the presentation. Independent activities, again, you and your organization to mutually reinforcing activities, which often requires some give and take around who's going to do what and why. And again, difficult conversations and sporadic communication has to become continuous communication, and that helps to build trust, right? Transparency, like this is what we're doing, this is who's doing it, and this is why. And that, again, very difficult because we're not used to working in that way. We're used to putting down that annual report and, a couple of blog posts every year, but this is a different way of organizing ourselves and our efforts. And efforts to either a backbone organization or organizations. So somebody's got to be driving the bus, and the driver can switch when the other driver needs a break or needs to run to the washroom, but sure that someone is driving the bus.
That's quite the metaphor there. Okay. But now we're going to talk about essential mindset shifts for collective impact. This comes from an article by Trainee Hanley Brown and Schuster. So let's go through them. There are three main areas we want to talk about. Mindset shift number one, which is who is involved. We need to get all the right eyes on the problem. That means thinking outside the box in terms of who's there. It's a theme we're going to keep pressing through this conversation. We have to go beyond the usual suspects. We have to get people who are willing, as Melanie said, to put aside their own organizational interests to focus on the common goal. And if our common goal is preventing and ending youth homelessness, that's going to require a shift. For some players, it's going to require that they actually see they have a role in the issue, right? So these kind of things are important. And it's going to mean working together as a system. So, as I said before, often our response to homelessness is quite fragmented and disconnected. You have to do more than have staff meet once a month to discuss things. Collaboration means much more. We have to get the community in an integrated way, the services in the sector, so that there's flow through, so when someone touches the system, they're actually touching a system, not just an agency. We have to connect to mainstream services, health, education, corrections, child protection. All of those mainstream services are important in that what they do can help contribute to the problem of homelessness, but what they do also can contribute to the solutions. The unusual suspects, you mentioned that before. Can we bring the police on board? How do we engage landlords, not just as people who are going to rent, as key players? Is there a role for private sector? And then finally, moving up, how do we get government and funders to align what they're doing to support this broader effort? The key thing with government is this, and they have their own collective impact challenges in terms of working horizontally across government departments, right? We can never solve homelessness if the responsibility for homelessness rests only with whatever part of government is involved in housing or social services even. We like to talk about youth homelessness as a fusion policy issue, right? So we need health there. The education system should be there, right? That's really key because every young person who is homeless was in school once and there was probably some adult in their life who knew something was wrong. The justice system, training. So we need a whole systems response at the higher levels of government to really tackle the problems and support the communities on the ground. Mind shift number two is how do we work together, right? So the relational is important as the rational. It's not enough to just set up a organizational or a chart that describes the connections between organizations. The relationships matter. Melanie talked a lot about trust building, getting to know. It means in relationships, it means a lot of give and take. Are you willing to give up something for the big goal that you're trying to achieve? Or are you going to work purely from the perspective of what's good for your organization? Structure is important as strategy. That's why this collective impact model is important. How do we organize the different parts of it? And that backbone support, what we found where there is collective impact, you really need someone, as you know, to use Melanie's metaphor, driving the bus. If the task of working collaboratively is at the corner of everyone's desk, nothing will happen. Now this last one is really important, and it's an ongoing struggle, right, for everyone. I mean, we all feel this, myself included. And this is sharing credit is as important as taking credit, right? When we focus on the overall larger goal and put aside, you know, the egos and the focus on our organization and its profile, and all those things are important. We don't dismiss that, you know, people need to get funding and need to keep their going, right? But on this larger goal of collective impact, we really have to like see that it's a movement, and that the movement is, you know, that the credit is dispersed and shared, and it's not so important.
And we sometimes change this slide to say sharing credit is more important than taking credit, because, you know, once you get in the habit of that, of taking a step back and making sure that, you know, the credit really is shared, it's kind of amazing, actually, because, again, that it's a trust-building exercise, and that's a huge contributor to it.
And it gets rid of a key barrier, right, the competition. So the other thing around creating impact is, like, really being solutions-focused in the work. So this involves advocacy, but also planning and, you know, moving forward. We have to get beyond just looking at what's wrong and figure out how can we make it right, and that's a real key part.
And how many of you before have a meeting or a series of meetings where folks say, we already tried that, it didn't work?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly, and that may be true, but conditions may have shifted, or you can take a new approach on an old idea that can have tremendous impact.
Yeah, that's right. You got to be solutions focused and don't get stuck on what didn't work in the past. Now, the third mind shift is about how progress happens. So we need to look at evidence models of policy and practice, but we also have to look at innovation and really capture it. And one of the challenges in many sectors, including the homelessness sector, is innovation stays very close to the ground. So how do we capture and describe and share those really good ideas? We need to look for silver buckshot instead of the silver bullet. In other words, we need to understand that there's going to be, in any complex problem, there's going to be different roads to get to the solution. And so we need to be mindful of those and not just like have a whole collection of approaches, but be mindful of how they integrate and work together. And so the final thing, and that will enable us to take things to scale. There's so many good programs in the country, but you know, one of the challenges is how do we take them and make them in every community? If they're really good and effective, how do we do that? And so this is the issue of taking things to scale. And there's three different, when we talk about going to scale, there's three different things we're considering here. First, scaling up. How do we create an impact on laws and policy to enable us to achieve what we want to do? Whether it's housing first for youth or the shift to prevention, how do we ensure that higher levels of government don't put in place barriers, either unintentionally or because of historical ways of doing things? How do they support the work that's being done?
And our efforts in Ontario right now in particular, and our collaboration with the Ministry of Housing and the province at large and the service managers will help us to collectively identify what are those barriers, what are those policy levers and opportunities, what needs to happen at the policy level provincially to enable what's happening at the community level. And, you know, I see some folks from Kamloops on here. Hi, Val. Hi, Sherry. And, you know, I know that one of the things that they struggle with their fantastic efforts on youth homelessness planning and implementation is that, you know, that larger policy context and when you hit that ceiling. And so our efforts, you know, in Ontario hopefully will help ensure that we're all singing from the same songbook in terms of what we need.
Yeah, and I think this is a really key point too, as you said, right? Working collectively to identify what the province needs to do is going to be much more effective than, you know, 44 different communities coming one at a time with a list of things that need to be changed. And again, in scaling up, one needs to be really solutions focused in dealing with government. Find out what they're interested in doing. How can the changes you're proposing align with what government's interested in already? Scaling out means impacting greater numbers, right? So how do we take those really good models and ideas and get them out to as many communities as possible? Ideas about how to approach youth homelessness prevention, they exist out there. But we need to spread the word and provide communities with the support to adapt them to their local context. And then finally, scaling deep requires that at the community level, we create the context where cultural values are going to shift, relationships are going to be in place, and there's going to be readiness to take on something that's going to be changed. Because when we're talking about change is something that most people will get excited about and support, but once you actually, you know, the boots hit the ground, that's when things can be really challenging. So there's got to be readiness and understanding of change, but we have to always come back to our overall goal, which is preventing and ending youth homelessness. That's going to be the key thing we're focusing on.
Oh, and I love this slide. I asked Steve to make me a special impact, the dark side, and he's a Star Trek fan, so it was really a stretch for him to make this happen.
It was really tough.
Yes. So there is a dark side, of course, and we alluded to it. You know, it is incredibly difficult for, and you know, we were having a great conversation yesterday with someone from the province that you know, said that even, you know, within government, it's just like with organizations. Like, you know, people always, that taking credit is a very difficult. You know, I'll give you a great example of, you know, a shift to prevention in a community. You know, we have a community partner that invested in upstream prevention through the Connect, and you know, the number of, they operated this small shelter, and you know, the number of shelter beds that they had, you know, they doubled them, and youth kept coming, so they decided to start working upstream to stop young people from landing. And what happened was then their beds were no longer full, and their funding model and, you know, the support from the board and the support from the funders was based on having that shelter, understanding that that service was necessary. And so, you know, it's really, really, really difficult to make that shift, and it required a ton of work for the organization to confront and reimagine itself, and also the change management process necessary with the board and the funders and the staff to recognize that, yes, this is the kind of change that we want to see. We're preventing young people from ending up in our shelter, and that has implications as an organization. But that is so much more important than, that is the bigger goal that we have to work toward. And so collective impact really does have a lot of challenges, and I think that that's why there are so few impact efforts out there, right?
But the one thing that is true for those who've been involved in this work, there are these challenges, but when you get it right, it's so transformative in terms of how you work and how you think about work, collaboration, that you wonder why you ever operated the old way. So the positive benefits are incredible, but what has to go into it, understanding you can't just get a group of people together to impact because we had a meeting. It requires a lot of work. Okay. Let's focus a bit on youth homelessness. We're going to go back to those 5 conditions of collective impact and just drill down a little in terms of youth homelessness. The first thing is that common agenda has to be the prevention and ending of youth homelessness, right? So that shift to the focus on prevention and ending youth homelessness doesn't mean no young person will homelessness, but the goal will be to make that event rare, short, and non-recurring, right? So that's what should drive your process and your thinking. Shared measurement is really important, and that's something that's absent, but I think there's a real opportunity in Ontario, and this could be true elsewhere. I know Alberta's made a lot of progress on this, is how do we engage in an agreement on the outcomes that we're looking for at the program and community level to actually make the shift to prevention. There's a whole bunch of things we need to do, and there's good resources out there, and this is one of the things we're going to be working to provide resources for communities so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. but we need to think about coordinated entry so that, and there are some communities who are doing this work really well already, many communities in Alberta, so that a young person can come in through many different doors, but they're entering a system, not a bunch of individual organizations. We need a common assessment tool. There are many out there, but the ones that we think are important, if we're going to take a positive youth development approach, we really, really need to have tools that look not just at risks and what's wrong with someone, but also the assets that they bring, right? Because that's what the kind of the work we're going to have to engage in. We need really good case management tools that focus on outcomes. We need to, in the way we're thinking about it, we need to move beyond looking at the outcome, just getting the person housed and off they go, but really starting from what does any young person need, any young person, housed or not, in terms of having adult support, an opportunity to make mistakes, housing unconditionally, the chance to focus on wellness, social inclusion, deepening relationships with family, with friends, building natural supports, these kinds of things. And so our case management tools have to capture that work so that we can be sure we're doing it. And then we need data management tools at the program level and the community level. And what will be great if we can do that at province-wide, then our ability to really have a sense of what's working will be enhanced considerably. The new HIFAS 4 is a good platform to do that work, and so we'll be working with communities to identify what would be like a module that they can use collectively around outcomes for youth, one that will allow them to adapt and add their own elements, but there will be kind of core outcomes that we'll have there. That's how we make a big social change beyond the community, but regionally and eventually nationally.
Mutually reinforcing activities. Again, we've been supporting communities around the country and also some provincial strategy development as well. And the mutually reinforcing activities is very important. You can come at it from different approaches, but you have to have a coordinated joint plan of action. And that's not just developing the plan. And I want to emphasize this. One of the reasons that we developed the Youth Homelessness Community Planning Toolkit is because even though it seems like a Herculean effort to make a plan, that's actually the easy part. It's the mutually reinforcing activities to implement the strategy and to trial and error and reset, trial, error, reset, that requires everyone to align their activities toward that larger vision. And then continuous communication. We already really touched on this a lot, but it is consistent and open communication that focuses on building trust. And for me, this is really important with community communication. You don't need to get everybody from across every system and every unusual suspect and every youth with lived experience and every service provider to every meeting for every discussion. And some of you on the line at that, because I know through reading through the guest list today, I know several of you have had this experience of thinking that initially, you really do have to have all those people in every conversation. So it's knowing when, why, and how to engage stakeholders. Because again, people are busy, their time is important, but becoming more and more savvy if you're the backbone organization or organizations, knowing how to make the best use of people's energy and enthusiasm on the issue. And then backbone support again. Very important that there are some designated resources, either an organization or a staff person, and it's not off the side of everyone's desk. And whoever is convening, it's really important that they're a trusted entity or individual within the community.
I think that's really important, right? This is not easy work, and it takes time. And so where it is most effective, there is some coordination. Like somebody has to be helping to get the organizations to work together, has to be able to help move people and organizations in the way they're thinking, has to draw on the thinking of those organizations. And also, I think really key here, which we haven't mentioned enough, but we'll talk about after, is really engage youth, right? Like in the communities that do a really strong job on engaging youth, it becomes, they typically come up with a lot of very clear ideas about what is needed. And it's going to be hard as a group of organizations to resist that and say it doesn't matter. So there's lots of different things. It's not always so easy as we keep saying, but it does. There are some key elements that are going to get you there, and that's what we're trying to frame here. So where do you start? We talked about the role of leaders are going to be important, and these can be like in the community, they can be in the sector, they can be
youth with lived experience.
Youth with lived experience. But that coordination piece is also going to be key, right? Like somebody's going to have to pull things together. One of the challenges that we see too is, to really move from planning to implementation. That's where the collective impact really, the rubber really hits the road, right? Because coming up with it, we've all had that experience where you have a strategic plan and it sits on a shelf. To actually take it and create the change, there's all kinds of unintended consequences you might come up against, but that's the big shift. And so you need leadership to drive the change in the face of what's going to be those difficulties.
Wonderful. And I would just name that in the Ontario context, we've seen incredible leadership emerging from the service managers and then bringing others along to create additional leadership within a community. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity in Ontario. Oh yeah, I like this slide. Include youth in the process and like really. We created a youth engagement toolkit after spending some time recently at the National Alliance Conference in the States and with a youth advisory group that the National Alliance has convened. I'm starting to think that engagement isn't the right word and that youth is a much better word, and we heard that from the youth themselves. And I'll give an example. Kingston and Ottawa, both communities in Ontario, and then as I mentioned before, Kamloops and British Columbia, phenomenal youth engagement processes to really put in the needs of youth with lived experience first and foremost. And what I loved in Ottawa is that some of our work that Steve's going to talk about in a minute is around housing first for youth. So the adaptation of the model for the developmental needs of a young person. And so the youth with lived experience participating in the systems planning process in Ottawa named that the core principles of housing first for youth should drive the entire system. And so now they're hanging everything that they do on that. And so, and that was transformative even for how we were thinking about housing first for youth and systems planning.
Do you want to talk about that? We've talked about this a bit already, like finding different players to come to the table is going to be really helpful in getting things done. And so the your collective is, the more that you can do. And that's because for all kinds of reasons. People come with new ideas, but they also have different bodies or players who can help create change. If you have challenges around policing and youth homelessness in your community, then perhaps rather than just confronting, it's like how do you engage them as being part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
Biteable chunks. I think this is really important. And, Sophia has just said, something on the chat. She's like, it makes system change seem really easy when it's actually difficult. And this is why I think biteable chunks are quite important. You can make this elaborate plan, but then when you get to implementation, like pick something that you can do and do successfully as a community. And that helps then to mobilize the more difficult activities to follow. There are some great examples, and I think about Kamloops and this fantastic project emerging from their plan called Rat Force. And so, they set their community attention to a goal emerging from the plan and then move toward that. So biteable chunks, because Sophia, you're right. I hope none of this makes it seem like it's really easy, because it's not at all. And how we know is because we haven't done it yet, right? and mobilizing strategies. I see some folks on the line from Austin, Texas, and we think international engagement is pretty important to learn from other contexts because we're the drivers of youth homelessness around the world in many contexts are similar, and folks have come up with a lot of innovations and solutions at the policy and practice level that we can learn from. And so in the States, Away Home America, which launched, borrowed our name and our approach and launched last year, they've been supporting 100-day challenges with the Rapid Results Institute. And I love this because it's exactly what we here in Canada, and that you gotta create an early win. You gotta do if a community gets stuck, you gotta find a way to kickstart the activity again. And so the 100-day challenge is one such tool. There are others, but a 100-day challenge to say, okay, what can we accomplish in 100 days, and set realistic goals, measurable targets. Okay, we're going to have, with appropriate models of support, 50 young people in the next 100 days. We're going to engage landlords to do it. We're going to engage unusual suspects. We're going to engage the mainstream system. Go. And, there's been some fantastic results from these kinds of strategies, and they really do help when they're stuck. And celebrate the wins. I think, we don't celebrate enough. Not saying that, youth homelessness is a party, but saying that people are doing really important work and trying to move mountains. And in this really difficult work of collective impact and systems planning and implementation, you do really need to celebrate the wins and celebrate them and showcase them to the rest of the community to help inspire and engage them as well.
Okay, what are the program models that can be applied at the community level that dictate a collective impact approach? Here's a diagram that shows how we move away from the, just focusing on the crisis to like really addressing prevention and helping young people exit homelessness through Housing First for Youth. All of these things, there was a question someone put forward around the policy shifts. All of these things are, like the program models are in existence, but for this to really take hold, we need policy shifts to support the work. Right, if you look at the middle part, exiting systems, right? Youth leaving care, we know that they're overrepresented in the homelessness, youth homelessness population. Youth exiting corrections are often dumped right into the homelessness sector. Many young people exit mental health and addiction services, inpatient services with no supports and wind up homelessness. Through research, we're very aware of the negative consequences of all that. To address those challenges, again, at the policy level requires horizontal thinking within provincial governments. It requires that ministries and departments that maybe aren't used to considering their role in homelessness or to reconsider, to expand the mandate. So imagine in corrections, for instance, if they were, if dollars were used and policy was put in place to ensure that every young person leaving corrections has support. There's lots of changes going on in Ontario around child protection laws and how things are organized. A lot of that can support communities to do the kind of Housing First models or other forms of support to help young people who are in care wind up after care in a situation where they're much more stably housed and they're able to do the things they need to do. If you look at the school-based prevention, that requires that the Ministry of Education, school boards, districts, schools start to see that they have a key role in addressing youth homelessness. And can we align our efforts to prevent youth homelessness with what's actually going on in school boards, that kind of thing. Get more deliberate, ensure that the policy and funding is in place to make that happen. In countries like Australia, they really drove down their youth homelessness numbers by focusing on schools. That's really new in Canada, but that's an example of some of the things we need to do. All of these models that we see here, there's important examples of how these can work at the community level, but we worry that people are going to get stuck if we don't have those higher levels of government provide the right kind of support to make sure that they happen well. this is an example of a key project, the Upstream project. This is an adaptation of something they do in Australia where they go into schools and do an assessment and identify young people who are at risk of homelessness. And so to again think about like what is, you know, how can communities address youth homelessness? One of the key findings of our recent national survey on youth homelessness was that 40% of homeless youth had their first experience before they were 16. And that group suffers the most, has the most adverse childhood conditions, the longest history of housing instability, that kind of thing. Right? So if you imagine that we need to really start working with young people under the age of 16, then all of those policy levers that we have to consider and reimagine come into play. How do we get into schools? What's the role of child protection? What's the role of community supports? How do we young people? How do we support them and their families? All of these are important planning questions that are going to be operationalized at the community level, but only if higher levels of government support the work.
And again, you know, because of the Ontario and you know, and other provinces and territories are starting to move in this direction as well. You know, we do have the Ministry of Housing leading the charge on taking a more interministerial approach so that as the communities that we're supporting and engaging and working with identify additional policy levers and you know, different ways that funding could support new efforts around preventing and ending youth homelessness. I think, you know, we have a real opportunity because it is a different approach. You know, if we're all working in our own silos at the community level, nothing is going to change. And if the province is working in their ministerial silos, nothing is going to change. So it is a huge shift in how we're all working, but it is necessary.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. The opportunity is great. You know, you have a province that's identified youth homelessness as a priority, a province that has really indicated that they understand the importance of interministerial work and are not just understanding it, but actively engaged in that. And at the community side, what we need is for people to help the province identify what is needed that will help them do this kind of work more effectively at the local level.
And again, solutions focused, like very clear and consistent messaging from communities around what will help and enable, and not just, you know, we need more funding, because that, you know, they hear that already.
That's right.
Yeah.
So one of the key transitions that we're trying to enable is the shift to housing first for youth, which means not just taking housing first and, you know, having a youth worker as a case manager, but like a really profound shift in terms of what are the models of accommodation and support. And so this model has been worked out, you know, with lots of input from people across the country, including many young people with lived experience of homelessness. And so we're going to be doing some demonstration projects coming soon in Ontario and elsewhere. This has really taken off actually around the world, a made in Canada idea. One of the key things here around Housing First for Youth is to really understand the core principles, right? So it's a rights-based approach, right? So young people have immediate access to housing with no preconditions. So at a systems level, there has to be the ability for young people to get the kind of housing they need, right? There needs to be youth choice, youth voice, and self-determination, so they should have a say in it. The positive youth development and wellness orientation expands from what is typically found in Housing First programs, right? So positive youth development, again, means looking at what's going well, how do we build assets, how do we build resilience. Individual and client-driven support, so young people have a say in what kind of support they need. We tailor the programs to the needs of young people, not force the young people to fit the program model. And then this final one is really important, social and community integration. A key part of the work that we have to learn to do much better is how do we help young people engage with the communities that they want? How do we build natural supports? How do we do family reconnect work so that young people have some kinds of connections to their communities? And how do we help, and this is the kind of thing you'd want with any young person, how do we help young people find out what they want to do in life? What are their interests? Where do they want to go? How do we help them get back to school? How do we help them find things that are going to be, that integrate them? And what's really key here too, if I can add one last thing, and this is important in social and community integration. We know that 30% across Canada, 30% of young people who are homeless are Indigenous. We really have to develop housing first models that are Indigenous-led and built on the knowledge and learnings of Indigenous people on how to do this. And if we can do that, we're going to be making a big impact.
And so we're going to end the webinar with a discussion about what resources we currently have to support your efforts and what's coming down the line. And, you know, and I always think about it as a toolbox that we're collectively building out because, you know, it depends on your audience and what you're trying to achieve. You might need a different tool. So
I think you actually have a toolbox that looks like that, don't you? You have a hammer with flames on it.
I do have a hammer with flames on it. I believe in that hammer. All right. So the planning toolkit, it includes a service manager's special appendix. That, you know, it's a 10, 11-page document that just outlines the unique opportunity and role that the service manager can play. Again, this is all, you know, free and open source online. Please take it and make use of it and spread it around.
The national survey that I mentioned before, this is an important tool to help inform them, you know, where you might want to be focusing your but it also helps communicate the nature of the problem locally, regionally, and nationally. Right? There's a lot of misconceptions about youth homelessness. You know, are they just bratty kids who don't like doing the dishes? This survey gives you good information on that will help contribute to your planning efforts. It really points to the need to focus on prevention and to rapid exit from homelessness.
And then the Human Rights Guide. This was a fantastic project we did with the UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing, Melanie Redman, and her team at Canada Without Poverty. And it's a guide that helps with developing community strategies for us to ground our efforts in the language and in the very real opportunities to attach ourselves to international conventions on the rights of children. And so, and again, this was developed with a lot of input from youth with lived experience. And we found that this guide resonates incredibly well with young people as a tool to first engage them in this process and help them to have the language that will empower them as individuals and in their collective efforts. So, and it's and what's really cool is it's now available in 6 or 7 other languages and being used across the EU because unlike us, you know, we're a little late to the game. Many of, you know, individuals, of course, have been using rights-based approaches, but as a country, we've shied away from talking about housing and homelessness and rights, and this actually gives us a language to start doing that.
So the Canadian definition of youth homelessness was launched about a year ago. In 2012, we produced the first definition of youth homelessness, which gave a definition but also a typology of housing circumstances. The definition can be useful at the community level because it defines the parameters of the problem. So we look at young people between 13 and 24. It means then that if we adopt that definition at the community level, then we have to start considering, okay, if that's the definition, what are we doing about 13 to 16-year-olds? 17 to 19, you know, 20 to 24, we're going to need different approaches and different responses. But it helps guide and helps remind those other institutions and systems that kind of break out youth and children from adult systems, that we have to work across those age spans and not just like get mired on looking at only people once they're over 18 or if they're under 18, that kind of thing.
And then I mentioned, you know, the Youth Engagement Toolkit that we're going to change the name to Youth Collaboration Toolkit. And so that's something that my team and I can point you to help your efforts on the ground. So reach out and let us know.
This Housing First for Youth framework that we have released a couple of years ago, we've been doing a lot of consultation in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere in the world, and we're in the process right now. We're going to be developing a more full-fledged toolkit that will give communities what they need, the ingredients to actually adapt and implement Housing First for Youth. We're also going to be paying special attention to how do we adapt the model for young people leaving care, right? So they've never been homeless, but it becomes a youth homelessness prevention. Young people leaving corrections, and also looking at how do we apply Housing First for Youth through an Indigenous lens and led by Indigenous people.
And also with special considerations around young people that may have FASD, so where an issue like choice becomes a slightly different conversation, right? And then also the specific needs for young people identifying as LGBTQ2S.
Well, that's a really nice lead.
Oh, yeah. So this, I couldn't be more proud of this body of work, and I had very little to do with it other than getting the funding and letting my staff and the national learning community that we host run with it. And so this is a fantastic, ever-evolving resource to support your community and your services to be not just tolerant, but welcoming and inclusive. And, again, this is ever-evolving. We're playing an employment module now for the toolkit. So, again, free, open source, online. Make use of it. It has wonderful training modules, peer-to-peer training, example policies and procedures, all kinds of things to support your efforts. And then additional stuff that we have on the go are coming down the line. So my team, so I have a full-time staff person, Mary Jane, who's a resource to any of you, tons of expertise in systems planning there. We also contract with Dr. Alina Turner, especially when you're getting to more complex issues in your community, things like cost modeling and measurable targets. Fantastic resource as well. And then we're starting to pull together additional team members to focus specifically on Ontario. So you've got that. And my team are convening an Ontario-specific community of practice and utilizing Workspace to do so. And that's something that we get to use thanks to the Observatory and the Government of Canada. So again, that's an online forum where you can have discussions, post difficult questions. And we also do a series of Ask Me Anythings in conjunction with that. Youth CI. Some of you in Ontario have actually taken advantage of this fantastic collaborative project between the McConnell Foundation, the Province of Ontario, and we left off the Laidlaw Foundation on accident there. But UCI, you can apply and they can provide collective impact training and support, theory of change development, and then they also have a granting stream for implementation. And so this is, again, we were talking about how your backbone efforts need to be resourced and you need some support. Well, the UCI program is specific to Ontario and is quite an important piece. And then the Trillium Collective Impact Granting Stream, again, specific to Ontario, and they're very eager to support true collective impact initiatives. And we've been working with them and thinking about how we, working together with Trillium as a way home can provide additional support for the province. So we'll hope to have some more to offer in that area in the coming months. And then a planning institute. The province is hopefully going to support us to bring together as many as 20 communities from Ontario with 3 representatives from each, and that will include the service manager for a 2 to 3 day event in September to really help fine-tune efforts where they're underway and kickstart efforts that need to get underway. And then finally, the Ontario Youth Homelessness Conference will be in Ottawa, February 2018. The lead partner is Carleton University, and we have a really fantastic steering committee putting together an amazing agenda that brings in folks not just from Ontario, but we'll be focusing on youth homelessness prevention and the ending of youth homelessness in Ontario.
So that's our presentation, 58 minutes later, and so we have a bit of time left if people have some specific questions.
And we had to keep it under an hour because you don't know this Oksana. She cracks a mean whip.
So, yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. No, I believe we answered the ones that are in there now. Melanie?
Yeah, we touched on systems change. We saw the shout-outs from our friends in Montreal and our friends in Kamloops, so we'll be following up with you. Don't worry about that. Good to hear from you. But yeah, the points are incredibly important around how, we can make a beautiful presentation and talk about all this, and it makes it sound so easy, but again, we'll go back to say it's not. It's not easy. That's why communities struggle to do it. But again, where communities have taken this approach, they're making strides.
Great. So if anyone has any questions, just let us know.
And just to let you know that the links up at the top that says web links, so those are the resources that were mentioned by Melanie and Steve earlier. So if you want direct links to those, just click up at the top in the web link section.
Okay, so someone has, or Christina has a question about, could we be more specific about policy lever changes you would like to see? There's a whole bunch of smaller level changes that are really important to consider. Some involve landlord-tenant legislation and tenants' rights as they apply to young people. I think one of the things that's a challenge is the limitation on length of stay in transitional housing, which for youth I think is really important. You know, so that if you stay more than a year, some communities don't want to let young people stay longer in transitional housing because then they have tenant rights. And so can we come up with solutions that are going to help work around those problems? The other areas where I think the major policy levers have to do with are, for this is what I would emphasize, is those systems that contribute to homelessness. We need to come up with solutions, build on the good work that's happening right now, like for instance in the child youth services, the reforms are very important. We really need a province-wide approach that's going to really tackle and address the problem of young people leaving care, and not make it simply just the issue of that ministry, but how do we work across ministries to support young people. In Europe, they talk about what's called an aftercare guarantee, which means that young people who have been taken into care have access to certain kinds of supports around systems navigation, rent, access to education, these kinds of things that aren't necessarily delivered by the Child Protection Services, but young people nonetheless have access to these. We really need to focus on the criminal justice system and young people leaving corrections, both in the juvie and the adult systems, and so there's all kinds of policy work there. This is a problem across Canada where in corrections, people see their mandate as ending when somebody's released, and so are there policy solutions that can support communities to do better work around transitions from care? And then finally, we've mentioned this many times, can we get, and this is true in every place across Canada, can we increase the collaboration between the education system and those who are working on youth homelessness? Can we see this as an important piece of work? The reality is that ending or preventing youth homelessness actually aligns really well with what the Ministry of Education and school boards are interested in terms of dropout prevention, school engagement, and school achievement, wellness, well-being, inclusion, all of these things, right? So how do we align that policy situation so that we can support a prevention approach?
And Oksana's going to kill us because I'm pretty sure she told us to turn off our cell phones. Anyway, I just want to add to that for Christina and for everyone else. So in the last year, the Observatory and Away Home released 2 policy briefs that also speak to a lot of the things we'd like to see from where we sit and from what we've heard from communities as well. And there's a federal policy brief and an Ontario-specific brief. Perhaps Oksana could post those as well or send them around for the group after. And we'll be releasing a 3rd policy brief with CAMH, the Graham Beck Foundation, the National Learning Community, the Observatory and Away Home on mental health. And that will be released in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that as well. And again, we're constantly going through a process of engaging with service providers, youth with lived experience, and experts to come to what we think are sound recommendations for policy and practice.
And the Without a Home report has a lot of information that points to policy levers. I think the one thing we have to acknowledge is that things are moving in the right direction in Ontario. As I said before, when the province identifies youth homelessness as a priority, that's a start. When there's an active engagement in cross-ministerial work, this is all important. A question from Jan and Kamloops. One thing that we are grappling with is measuring how we are doing, not the outcomes, but rather self-assessment of our collective impact. Do you have any resources to support or support related to this? Well, this involves process evaluation. That's really important in the communities to sort of, that involves reflection, involves different stakeholders, including young people, right? Like if you really want to find out how you're doing, you should be talking with young people about what they're doing. And so there's lots of knowledge about how to do that kind of work, I think, out there. We haven't put anything together quite yet, but I think that that's probably a good idea for us to consider, is how do we support communities to do that, right? And that should be part of planning. I always say planning and evaluation are two sides of the same coin. If you evaluate well, you're probably planning quite well. And if you have a good solid plan, the evaluation should roll from it, because there should be clarity in terms of what it is you're wanting to see change. Okay, we're waiting for a few more questions. Okay.
Oh, yay. That's great, Jen.
Great. Good. And the great thing is, Jen, and to others, when you're doing really interesting work, whether it's in Montreal or Kamloops or elsewhere, let us know about it, because we want to share it, right? Other people can learn from the work that you're doing, and I think that's how we all move faster together.
And if that you've developed that you would like to share out around systems planning and implementation, please, just send it to info@awayhome.ca, and we'll put it up on our website and also in the workspace area, that forum that I was talking about, which I would encourage all of you to register for. It's free, easy. Oksana, do you mind also giving everyone the information for how to do that?
Yeah, sure. I will. So there's a link at the top which says Discuss Community Planning. So if you go to that section, that actually goes to the Youth Homelessness Community Planning section on the workspace. So you can post any questions, any thoughts, any kind of concerns, or anything really that you would want to discuss with the community workspace on homelessness members. And yeah, we have that resource available for collaboration, working with your colleagues and anyone else who might be familiar with community planning.
Great. Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, I think, and then...
Yeah, because Jen is typing. Fingers on fire there, Jen. Wait, no. Okay, there. 2 people are typing. You can tell at the end of these webinars we start to come undone.
And we started that way.
On the workspace, yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so the webinar will be shared out to everyone who registered in the follow-up email, and it will also be available on the Way Home website. And like I mentioned, we channel, so we'll put all of those there as well, so you can link them on your website, or if you wanted to share them with someone else, you could do so.
Great, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, we'll wrap it up, but also if people think of something later, feel free to contact either of us.
Definitely, definitely. And thank you for your time today and your Herculean efforts.